November 1978, Oxford, England. Outside, protesters. Inside, a political discussion.
Have one over there.
Mr. President, sir, to misquote Webster, should something chance to poison it near the head, death and disease through all the land do spread. Now, does the honourable gentleman not agree that, of all qualities essential for government, honour is the most important?
Well, I think the sense of the question, and I couldn't quite hear it all, the question was, isn't honor the most important element, I guess, in government or in a man or what have you? Yeah, I would say yes. I would say yes. And as a matter of fact, I would say to this particular audience, or to any audience, that a political man, he will rise or fall based on that. He has to gain the respect and confidence of his colleagues. He's got to keep his word. If he doesn't keep his word, he may win in the short run. He isn't going to win in the long run. I think one of the problems with regard to what we call the Watergate business, because while you didn't say that, I will imply it. They felt that on this matter, that I had not handled it properly, and they were right. I screwed it up, and I paid the price.
In these days when Iran is every night's nightmare, it may seem beside the point to bring up Watergate. But as the young man just said, the subject is honor. The cynical 70s may be what future historians will call the era, with reason. In the last 10 years, we'd lost a war, a president was caught lying and resigned, inflation mounted, and our private lives seemed bent only on the pursuit of pleasure. The mood of the country changed briefly during the crisis in Iran, but it's too early to know if this moment of national unity will continue. We mean to do more than a flashcard review of the decade and less than a definitive history. We decided that Watergate, Vietnam, and July 4th, 1976 were the overlapping ripples that circle our recent public history. If these are the cynical 70s, it's because cynicism is often disappointed idealism. The dream and the nightmare exist together. In the scandal that was Watergate, we found that our Constitution worked. In the defeat that was Vietnam, we found the hard truths about the limitations of American power abroad. In the celebration of our Declaration of Independence, we found we were still dependent on our national honor to protect our private interests. So we begin our summation, remembering Samuel Butler's useful words, God cannot alter the past, but historians can. The Republican Convention of 1972, and things were not what they seemed. This was a big political story, but there was an even bigger one hidden at the time.
Follow 7, precede 8.
No, Walter 1, no.
Newsmen knew there wasn't going to be anything startling coming from this convention because the end was known from the beginning. Richard Nixon was to be crowned king of the Republican Party. What we were covering was a coronation, a ceremonial, not a political fight.
5, 6, take track.
At the time, we didn't know that all this would be undone by an event that had happened 9 weeks earlier, on June 17th, the Watergate break-in. While we were covering this convention, most Americans hadn't even heard of Watergate, and most newsmen had no idea of its importance. We were here because the Republican Party and the American voter wanted Richard Nixon elected once more to the presidency of the United States. The country wanted Richard Nixon for president in '72 because of what it knew about him. He had opened the door to China. He was doing better than even with the Soviets. He seemed to be ending the war in Vietnam, and he had stopped the riots in the streets by promising to end the draft. He beat his Democratic opponent in the November election by one of the biggest pluralities of the century. What the country didn't know about him would bring him down. Nixon's obsession with secrecy had resulted in the corruption of governmental intelligence agencies. Nixon's hatred of his enemies had created a clandestine police force called the Plumbers, paid for with campaign funds. His vice president, Spiro Agnew, would be forced to resign because of a kickback scandal that had gone on for years. So there we were, covering the news events we could see on the surface, while underneath there was a river of undiscovered news flowing, eroding the very basis of America's trust in its leadership. The one event that would bring this underground river of secrets above ground had already happened, the Watergate break-in. So let's go back 9 weeks to June 17th. Here is the day that cost America a political hero. The break-in would not have been covered by news organizations at all, except that it took place at Democratic headquarters. What only a few people knew is that the team that broke in here was part of an expensive operation illegally spying for the White House itself. Even today, nobody knows exactly why the burglaries took place, except that someone wanted to put a bug on this telephone belonging to the man who ran the Democrats' office. It wasn't a burglary for money, because the arrested men were found to have thousands of dollars of their own in sequentially marked bills. That money could be traced. The press got close to the story, even on that first day. We caught up to an attorney hired for bail procedures.
Have they given any indication where the money came from that the police found?
No, sir. No, sir.
The U.S. attorney said today they were caught red-handed, and yet they've entered a plea of not guilty.
That's right. Absolutely.
So you believe they were not caught red-handed?
I said only they entered a plea of not guilty.
The money could be traced to the Committee to Re-elect the President, run by John Mitchell, a former Attorney General. On the day of the break-in, Mitchell was at a party with his wife, Martha.
Hello, everybody. What are you doing tonight?
Starting almost at once, the men around the president began to see that the Watergate break-in could expose the underground river of illegal acts that this man, Mitchell, would later call the White House horrors. The connection between the burglars and the Committee to Re-elect the President was dangerous. The man on the left was at that time the key. James McCord, an ex-CIA agent who had just been released on bail, was already known to the press as the man in charge of security for the President's committee. McCord had to be kept silent.
There's nothing he has to say at this time.
Keeping McCord and the other burglars silent would cost the White House about $500,000, money that came from illegally obtained campaign funds. As for the press, we had no idea at this early time that the President's office was involved, but we did sense we were on to a big story.
Sure you wouldn't care to comment about Mrs. Munson?
We groped.
He doesn't know what's going on.
She certainly knows him. You know Mrs. Munson?
A chase started that's not ended even today.
Mr. Hunt. Mr. Hunt. He doesn't want to talk.
No, he don't like it.
Parts of the chase were absurd. A group of reporters going after a car containing the head of the CIA. Because we began to suspect the president was involved, the chase went into the executive part of government. Culprits became celebrities. John Dean, the president's lawyer, was disbarred for his criminal actions and served a small prison term. Yet he received a good deal of money for a book and a later television series based on it. Americans got confused between fame and notoriety.
Mr. Mitchell, the New York Times quotes government investigators this morning as saying that you helped coordinate a plan to cover up the Watergate after the incident.
I noticed the New York Times story this morning, and it's about the same as every other one I see in the New York Times. I don't believe any of them.
Do you think my husband's that stupid? And whom do you think he's been protecting? Whom?
I have no idea who.
Mr. President, he has been protecting. Under no uncertain circumstance.
Some say right after the break-in, Richard Nixon had a choice.